Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. You have been asking me constantly what is happening in the Kursk region and other parts of the front line in Ukraine. Today, I don't have the time to do a full video, so I will be covering what is exactly happening on the front line, and then the rest of the news we'll cover in some video down the line, hopefully very soon. What you need to know is that the situation deteriorates severely in large sense because of the ban of the intelligence sharing from the Trump administration. In the Kursk region, they were the most dependent on for their activities, as they were using that intelligence data that US has been providing to specifically track the Russian soldiers and personnel movements to try to counter them. This has not paid out well for Ukrainians, and they're having a pretty difficult situation. Right now, Ukraine has been in a position to select what exactly is their future course of action. I talked about this in my recent video, and I think we already have the answer, because Russians have been attacking Ukraine from both sides for a while now, and they have been putting a lot of pressure on Ukrainians. There is a lot more Russians in the area than there are Ukrainians. We're talking about 3-to-1 to 4-to-1 ratio of Russians to Ukrainians, and they have been pushing on Ukrainians in this salient. And since the stopping of the intelligence sharing, Russians were able to succeed in kind of critical way on towards the Kursk region axis. They were able to attack towards this direction and towards this direction. This is important because this green line over here is the main supply line for stuff into the Kursk salient. And basically, this created the situation for Ukrainians that they need to choose whether they pull out their troops from the Kursk region or they try to reinforce with additional forces and try to fight these Russian advancing forces that are controlling this supply line and to push them away. And this is something I talked about yesterday on the stream, but already today we see the changes on the map, and I think the answer is pretty much there. Because if Ukrainians would choose to pull out from the Kursk region, we would see Ukrainians kind of slowly start getting some of the land on the further parts of the territory being cut off and given, so to say, to Russians. And if we use this magical function from the deep state map and go back into the past, we see that over the last couple of days, the controlled area by Ukrainians have been slowly shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So for me, this is a very clear indicator that Ukrainians have made a decision to pull out, or at least to contain the presence on the Kursk area to a minimum. So that's what's happening in the Kursk region. Russians got the upper hand because of the lack of the intelligence data for Ukrainians, and Ukrainians have been falling back since then. For the situation around Pokrovsk area, the second main front line, here Russians are having major trouble. They are not really able to advance further. They're exhausted. We see the statistics for the attacks and captured territory by Russians falling steadily, and we see that it seems that Ukrainians are actually even able to counterattack in a very limited manner. Most notably, people are describing that the situation here is very similar to the Kursk region, except Russians are obviously more keen to taking losses compared to Ukrainians. Ukrainians, when they see the situation is bad, they would rather pull out, whereas Russians and their generals are just saying, no, 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 we go on further, further, further. The main and important point here is this village of Selidove. This is kind of the main logistics hub. And after that, Ukrainians have been using a lot of drone swarms to basically control this area intensively. This prevented Russians to send significant armored forces further towards the line. And the difference is between this area over here and at what was happening before Selidove, right over there, is that this area, which is, I'm going to call the area A, so the area A is a lot less densely packed with settlements and tree lines than whatever was happening before. So there is like a big open field for Russians here to cross, and with a higher density of Ukrainian drones in the area, their vehicles just get burned down, and they are dependent on essentially mules and donkeys to get any kind of equipment and ammunition towards their forward positions. This prevents Russians from trying to continue encircling Pokrovsk and actually allows Ukrainians to counterattack in a limited fashion. Russians state that Ukrainians are conducting like a massive counterattack. I don't really see it for now, but it definitely seems that they are having troubles advancing further. With regards to the second part of the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd axis, this is kind of the square that Russia once captured. This is like both Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, two big settlements. That Russia here was not advancing fast enough, and they later even redeployed some of the forces to the southern area because there was more progress south of Pokrovsk. But in this area, Ukrainians were actually able to, because of the way that land is set up and because of the fact that Russia here has not breached the main defense lines, Ukrainians have here actually quite a heavily defended and heavily layered defense positions. So it's pretty impossible for the Russians to attack north of Pokrovsk. This brings us to this whole situation. To understand what is happening is that right now, the encirclement of Pokrovsk that Russia has been stating and Pokrovsk was about to fall, this is all now put on hold. Russia doesn't really have the tools right now to solve this, and they are pretty exhausted. So right now, it's a pretty bad situation for Russians. Around Toretsk, a lot of people have been claiming that Ukrainians are having a great time, that they're just pushing the Russians in all directions. I am less optimistic than that. I think Ukrainians are definitely pushing the Russians out. Russians were forced to send in additional reinforcements into the area to try to control and prevent Ukrainians just completely retaking the town. But despite the tough battles, Ukrainians are having some additional small successes in the city of Toretsk. So all of the Russian propaganda channels stating that they're advancing in Toretsk in all direction have been actually thwarted, and Ukrainians are having a pretty good fighting position right now. Additionally, good news is that Russian bridgehead that they created on in the northern side, just north of Kupiansk. This is kind of the main logistics hubs of Ukraine. In this area, and Russia was having trouble advancing along the river, but they were able to cross the river and create a bridgehead of this river, and it could have been threatening, but thankfully it seems Ukrainians have taken some control of the situation, and right now we see that Ukrainians are even pushing back against the Russian-controlled bridgehead. So good news on every kind of major front line in Ukraine. Just please remember that nothing is easy. A withdrawal of the US help, while it is possible to be substituted by Ukraine, is definitely, especially in the short term, come with a lot of pain. And we're talking pain, we're talking about civilians lost, less capacity to shut down missiles, losses of more territory of Ukraine, more Ukrainians captured and killed. That is the cost and price of Trump just making a temper tantrum and playing in Russians' favor and being like that little bitch of Putin. So no, Ukraine is paying with their blood, and they'll be playing more with the blood until they find some kind of substitute for that incredibly important US help. It doesn't mean that it's not substitutable, but it means that it will come with a lot of pain. Thank you so much for this episode. The full episode where we're going to look at the news and everything is going to come as soon as I can do it. Trust in Ukrainian armed forces. I love you. Slava Ukraini, and I will see you next time.